He kicked me ass, he knocked me out. Maybe I don't got the heart for this no more. I would never do that. I'm just, listen, you think the great Mike Tyson would let something small like that discourage him?
The tragedy of Mike Tyson goes far beyond the ring, revealing a powerful story of resilience, pain, and redemption. The same man who once terrified champions now battles quieter struggles at 59. Despite becoming the youngest heavyweight champion ever at just 20 years old in 1986, Tyson has described his life as a roller coaster of pain. Tyson's story isn't simply about athletic glory lost, it's about a man who struggles with mental health, financial turmoil, and the ghosts of his past have shaped who he is. What's his story today? Today, we'll the heartbreaking story of the boxing legend. The wounds that shaped him. They often said that behind the fearsome fighter, the world eventually came to know, stood a deeply wounded child, because the foundation of Mike Tyson's chaotic and turbulent life had been built long before he ever put on a pair of gloves. Those who looked closely explained that his troubles began with abandonment so early that he could barely form memories around it. His biological father walked out when he was only 2 years old, leaving behind a fractured household that never quite found its footing again. Tyson later talked about how another man, Jimmy Kirkpatrick, someone he had believed was supposed to fill the role of a father, also disappeared without warning. That left his mother, Lorna Smith Tyson, to raise her children alone while carrying her own burdens. Tyson would describe her as a woman battling alcoholism, someone who struggled to stay afloat. And he even spoke in painful honesty about believing she might have engaged in sexual work just to survive. His relationship with her was anything but nurturing, and he once said he never remembered a moment when she looked at him with pride. He explained that she only knew him as the wild child who roamed the streets, coming home with clothes she knew he hadn't legally earned. What kind of effect does it have on a child when the one person who should protect and celebrate him never gives him that sense of safety? Tyson often admitted that the emotional neglect carved a hole inside him, a void he could never quite fill no matter how many championships or accolades he later collected. Those who studied his story said the deepest wound came even earlier. At just 7 years old, Tyson was usually mistreated by a stranger who abducted him from the street. He carried that trauma in silence for decades, later saying it wasn't something he felt the world needed to know. He held the experience like a locked box inside himself, the kind that shapes someone without ever being spoken aloud. And then there was the reality of where he grew up. Brownsville, Brooklyn, in the 1970s was a world many described as unforgiving, a place where poverty and violence were so constant they almost became background noise. The area had been labeled the murder capital of New York, where shootings, stabbings, and muggings happened almost daily. Street gangs, hardened by the same environment, ruled entire blocks. Economic depression left buildings crumbling, neighborhoods dim, and opportunities nearly non-existent. Tyson, small for his age with a high-pitched voice and a lisp, became an obvious target. Bullies mocked him cruelly, calling him Fairy Boy, and beat him so often that he said he was scared to walk to the store by himself. How does a child build confidence in a world where every step outside feels like stepping into danger? The violence around him seeped into him in ways he didn't yet understand. By the time he was 13, the police had already arrested him 38 times, a number that stunned anyone hearing it for the first time. The pattern seemed tragically predictable. A neglected, traumatized child trying to survive by any means necessary, acting out of fear, anger, and a desperate need for control. At first, Tyson didn't fight back against his bullies. He ran, he hid, he tried to avoid them. But everything changed the day one older boy killed Tyson's beloved pigeon right in front of him. That act, small to most, but devastating to a child who found comfort in animals, triggered something inside him. Tyson struck the boy with a fury he didn't know he possessed. In that single moment, he discovered he had a natural talent for fighting, a skill that had been lurking under all the pain and fear. He later said that something shifted in him that day, as if the world had pushed too hard, and he finally pushed back. The real turning point, however, came when he was sent to the Tryon School for Boys, a juvenile detention facility where a counselor named Bobby Stewart noticed something different in the troubled teenager. Stewart, a former boxer himself, recognized not just Tyson's raw strength, but his potential. He said he had never seen a kid hit with such force and precision at such a young age. Believing the boy deserved a chance bigger than the one the streets had offered him, Stewart introduced him to Cus D'Amato, the legendary boxing trainer. Tyson often recalled the moment he met D'Amato as the moment his life changed direction entirely. D'Amato became the father figure he had never truly had, a man who saw not only Tyson's anger, but the scared child behind it. He taught him to discipline his mind, to understand that fighting was not just about fists, but about control, focus, and self-belief. D'Amato told him he could be the youngest heavyweight champion in history, and Tyson said those words were the first time he felt someone believed in him. Was it any surprise, then, that the boy who had been discarded by so many clung to the man who finally saw something worth saving? Tyson later said in simple, heartbreaking honesty that if he hadn't found boxing, and if he hadn't found Cus, he probably would not have survived at all. And perhaps the real question lingering beneath it all was this: had they uncovered anything at all? The crew stood in silence, realizing they had only peeled back the first layer of a far bigger secret. And trust me, you'll want to stay till the very end for what comes next. Fame as a double-edged sword. Fame, in Mike Tyson's life, often seemed like both a crown and a curse. And people around him would later say that the version of Tyson the world adored was never the same man who was quietly falling apart behind the scenes. Observers described how, at the height of his career, the pressure of being a global icon pressed down on him in ways that no championship belt could ever compensate for. Tyson himself once said he had become the most recognizable face on the planet, more than the Pope, more than Queen Elizabeth, more than the President. And those who were close to him recalled how this forced spotlight created a sense of suffocation rather than pride. He admitted openly, at 57, that he didn't handle the fame too well at first, explaining that a young fighter initially enjoys the idea of being a champion, but eventually loses control of everything around him. And that loss of control was where his trouble truly began. Friends remembered how people constantly swarmed him: promoters, acquaintances, strangers seeking money, attention, or a piece of the Tyson brand. It made him feel like the very thing the world celebrated was the same thing tearing him apart. He sometimes said he felt overrated as an entity, as if the public Mike Tyson had grown so large that the real man could barely breathe underneath. Meanwhile, those who watched him rise financially explained how success masked deeper pain that few people ever saw. Reporters listed the mansions, the cars, the jewelry, 4 penthouse apartments, 3 mansions, 200 cars, and so much luxury that it created an illusion of a man living his dream, when in truth, he was wrestling with demons that money could not silence. Tyson struggled with substance addiction, reckless spending, and emotional turmoil that drove him into bankruptcy, losing roughly $400 million he had earned across his legendary career. People around him would later say that his extravagance was never about joy, but about distraction, a way to fill a void he did not know how to address. Tyson himself confessed that his life felt like a string of regrets. Regret over his conduct, his decisions, the relationships he failed to protect, and the hurt he caused others. He said that even after achieving everything he once thought he wanted, his ego took far more away than success ever gave back. This left him with the unsettling truth that he had acquired everything except peace. But perhaps the most heartbreaking part of the story is the loneliness that lived quietly beneath the spotlight. Tyson once told the Nevada State Athletic Commission that he did not have one friend in my entire life, and people around him knew he truly believed that. Even though some associates insisted they cared for him, Tyson's own perception of isolation remained deep and unshakable. And perhaps the real question lingering beneath it all was this. After Cus D'Amato's death, Tyson lost the one person who truly understood him, leaving him emotionally unanchored in a world demanding too much. This loss shaped everything that followed. So stay with me till the very end to see how deep the scars go. Losses that left scars. Life, as many people close to Mike Tyson often said, seemed to take from him the very things he loved the most, and the wounds left behind were deeper than anything an opponent could ever land on him in the ring. Those who knew him explained that the death of Cus D'Amato in November 1985 shattered something inside him that never fully healed. D'Amato had been more than a trainer. He had been the guiding force who shaped a lost and angry kid into a disciplined fighter with purpose. Tyson carried his mentor's casket as a pallbearer and later admitted he felt empty in a way he could not express, saying that when Cus died, he lost his spirit and could never shake the feeling that life had punched him harder outside the ring than any heavyweight ever had inside it. Some people found it surprising when he spoke about his mother's death at 16, calling it one of the best things that ever happened to him because, in his words, she would have babied him and stopped him from learning how to survive the world on his own. But even as he said that, he also confessed another truth, that he never had the chance to truly talk to her or know her, and that this absence was crushing in ways he carried quietly for the rest of his life. How could a young man lose both his grounding figure and his mother before even reaching adulthood and not end up shaped by that grief? People close to Tyson recalled how his romantic relationships followed a painful pattern of chaos, public clashes, and emotional ruin. His marriage to Robin Givens in 1988 dissolved almost as soon as it began, wrapped in accusations of violence and instability that played out on national television, with Givens describing life with him as torture, pure hell. His next marriage, to pediatrician Monica Turner, ended in 2003 after accusations of infidelity, and friends said each failed relationship made Tyson feel as though the world was confirming his worst fears about himself. Fears that he said had been buried in him since childhood. Jose Torres, one of the people who spent significant time with Tyson, once said Tyson admitted that he could not control his rage, as if anger lived in him like a trapped animal he never managed to tame. And then came the tragedy that would mark him more deeply than any other: the death of his 4-year-old daughter Exodus in 2009. The accident, involving a loose treadmill cord, was described by police as a moment where she slipped or placed her head through a loop that acted like a noose. Tyson later spoke about how his first instinct had been rage and violence, saying he wanted to grab a gun and lose control, because he could not understand why life kept taking the people he could not live without. How does a father recover from something so cruel, especially after already losing so many anchors in his life? Those who listened to him over the years said Tyson constantly wrestled with his own identity, often sounding like a man who was both aware of his pain and trapped inside it. He once described himself as someone whose emotional growth had been stunted early in life, as if the boy he once was never grew out of the wounds he carried. On his podcast, he sometimes spoke with a kind of heartbreaking honesty, calling himself someone caught in a cycle of self-hatred. He confessed openly that he hated himself, explaining that tearing himself down felt just as motivating as lifting himself up, even though it also destroyed him from the inside. His struggle with his mental health led him in and out of treatment facilities, where he admitted that his mind felt like a torture chamber that never seemed to give him peace. People around him often said that Tyson was one of the most complex and contradictory men they had ever seen. Someone capable of deep tenderness, yet haunted by the parts of himself he could not escape. And Tyson himself once summed this up better than anyone else could, saying he was many things at once: a convicted rapist, a hellraiser, a father, a loving father. And perhaps the real question lingering underneath it all was this: how does a man carry the weight of everything that shaped him? Grief, love, trauma, survival, and the kind of losses that scar you long before your fists ever touch a ring? In that single reflection, he revealed the raw truth of who he'd become. Stay with me till the very end, because his search is far from simple. Searching for peace at 59. In the present day, people close to Mike Tyson often say that he seems to be standing at a strange and delicate crossroads, somewhere between the fierce storms of his past and the quieter, more peaceful life he is trying so hard to build. They explain that his journey toward inner calm is promising, but still very complicated, because he carries memories and emotions that never fully loosen their grip on him. Tyson himself has been speaking openly about how he views everything he went through, and he has surprised many by describing adversity as something he now sees as beautiful. He has been heard saying that he is happy he endured every painful experience, because without adversity, people would be nobody. Those around him often mention how he dismisses the idea of legacy entirely, explaining that he believes legacy is only another word for ego, something that does not mean anything after a person dies. In his own words, he simply sees himself as someone passing through, no longer chasing glory or recognition, but trying to find acceptance in everyday life. And when people ask him whether he wants to be remembered as the greatest heavyweight of all time, he usually gives the same answer: he does not believe in legacy anymore. Friends and family members also say that today, Tyson's identity revolves mostly around being a father and a husband. He has 7 children, and he has been married to Lakiha Spicer since 2009. And those who know him closely say that stability is now his deepest priority. His family has seen how substance helps him soften his intensity, and they even encourage him to continue using it because it keeps him calm and grounded. He has described moments when his wife and children told him, almost pleading, that he should smoke because, without it, he became too intense, even though he was not doing anything wrong. People around him explain that for Tyson, happiness has become something simple, just living life, being with family, spending time with friends, and trying to stay balanced emotionally. He often talks about how those peaceful moments mean more to him than any championship belt ever did. But perhaps the most emotional and heartbreaking part of his journey is the fear he still carries. The fear of becoming the version of himself that once terrified the world, and eventually terrified him too. He has spoken through tears about hating that old version of himself and being scared of him, explaining that if that person ever comes out again, hell would come with him. Those who heard him say this describe how deeply it revealed his internal struggle, because he genuinely believes that the rage, violence, and emotional fire that fueled his younger self still exists somewhere inside him. He said he feels like he is constantly working on the art of humbleness, a skill that does not come naturally to someone shaped by trauma, fame, and aggression. He has even admitted, in moments of stark honesty, that despite his tough exterior, he still feels like a scared little boy inside. The same boy who grew up in chaos, fighting for survival long before he ever stepped into a boxing ring. People close to Tyson often say that this vulnerability is what makes his transformation so powerful. They describe how he continues to use substance, meditation, and therapy to manage anger and keep his thoughts calm. He has been explaining to anyone who listens that fear can be a friend, but the mind can be an enemy, and that the real work lies in learning how to control the mind before it leads a person into darkness. Observers who follow his journey say that the contrast between the man he used to be and the man he is trying to become could not be more striking. With this, we have come to the end of this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, do well to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. To enjoy more thrilling stories, click now on the following video that pops up on your screen.